Hello everybody, this is Eric White. Today in this third screencast on OpenXML Word Processing ML, I'm going to discuss annotations. Annotations are these interesting little bits of markup that you find here and there in an OpenXML Word Processing ML document, and it's really useful to know what all those little pieces of markup mean. In addition, there are some scenarios where it's really useful to use annotations. You may want to insert comments or insert bookmarks or find bookmarks and do something interesting with them. There are essentially two varieties of annotations. Another way to say this is that there are two approaches for putting together the markup for annotations. The first is inline annotations, and the second is cross-structure annotations. Let's take a look at those two forms so that we understand what they are, and then further on in the screencast, we can identify the type of annotation for each annotation variety that we look at. Let's create a small word processing ML document that contains one example of an inline annotation and one example of a cross-structure annotation. Insert a little bit of text. For an example of an inline annotation, I am going to select the galleries include, and I am going to go to the Review tab. I'm going to turn on change tracking, and then I'm going to delete that small run. Now for an example of a cross-structure annotation, I am going to select some text. It's going to start in the middle of the first paragraph and extend into the middle of the second paragraph, and I'm going to insert a comment. Save it, close it. I'm going to drag this document into Visual Studio and look at it in the OpenXML Package Editor Power Tool for Visual Studio 2010. Expand the Word node and open up the main document part. I'll format the XML. And right here with this W::DEL element, you can see an example of an inline annotation. That this W::DEL element indicates that everything inside of that element as contents of that element are deleted. In other words, what is deleted is this run element underneath the W::DEL element. So in other words, an inline annotation is an element that has as child content the markup for the word processing ML that it applies to. However, there would be a problem with using that variety of a structure for a comment. The hierarchy of markup in this word processing ML document is based on paragraphs. One paragraph contains runs. Underneath that runs, there are W::T elements. And yet this comment annotation needs to start at one point inside of one paragraph and extend to another point inside of another paragraph. So the approach that word processing ML takes is that there are three elements that you use to define the location of a comment. There's the comment range start, and it has this ID. There's a comment range end, and it also has an ID. And somewhere in there, close by, there is a run. Inside the run, there is a comment reference element, and it has the same ID of 1. Both bookmarks and range permissions follow this same cross-structure annotation approach. There are examples of revision tracking that both use the inline annotation, as you saw with the W::DEL element, and that use a cross-structure annotation, for instance, when you delete a content control. Now to finish talking about comments, This comment ID is 1. It is an integer, and what this refers to, this is an index into the comments part. We'll go look at the comments part, format the XML. We can see a comment with the ID of 1, and underneath that comment element is the actual contents of that comment. One pertinent point about comments is comments make use of something called an implicit relationship. The main document part has a relationship to the comments part, and if we look at the properties, we'll see that that relationship has a relationship ID of RID5. However, if we go look inside that document.xml, we'll never see a reference to RID5. It's implied that a main document part has a relationship to a comments part if there are comments, and the way that you find the comments part is you iterate through all the relationships from the main document part, and you look for a relationship that has a particular relationship type. This is different from, for instance, headers and footers. As we saw in the last screencast, in section properties, there are attributes that refer to the relationship ID for each header and footer, and to navigate from the main document part to one of those headers or footers, you have to get out that relationship ID, you have to find the relationship from document.xml that has that specific relationship ID, and then given that relationship that you found via the relationship ID, you can open up the related header or related footer. The OpenXML SDK takes care of a lot of this plumbing for you, but it's useful to understand the difference between implicit and explicit relationships here. And with that, we've covered about everything we have to cover with comments. Let's take a look at bookmarks now. I'll create a new Word document, insert some random text, and first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a bookmark right here. I'll call this bookmark A. I'm also going to insert a bookmark here, and this bookmark is going to start in the middle of one paragraph and end in the middle of another paragraph. I'll call this bookmark B. And finally, I am going to select the first two characters in the first paragraph before I save the document and close it. Now I'll drag this document onto Visual Studio, and let's take a look at it in the OpenXML package editor. I'll format the XML, and what we'll find is we'll see 3 bookmarks in this main document part. Down here we can see the bookmark start for bookmark 1, and we can see its name is A, and here we can see the bookmark end. And if I scroll down further towards the bottom of the document, I can see the bookmark start for bookmark number 2, and it's in the middle of a paragraph, and I can see the bookmark end for bookmark number 2, and it's in the middle of another paragraph. And if we go back to the beginning of the document, we'll find this funny bookmark here that has a name of _go_back. It's a bookmark with an ID of 0, and this bookmark surrounds the text that was selected when I saved and exited the document. This is a bookmark that is maintained automatically by Word. One of the things that makes bookmarks a little bit tricky to deal with is that bookmark start and bookmark end elements can either appear here as a sibling of a run, or they can also appear up as a sibling of the paragraph. So for instance here, if I select this bookmark end, I'll cut it there, and I'll paste it here as a sibling to the paragraph. I'll save it, and now I'll open the document, and I am going to go to the Insert Bookmarks, and I'll select Bookmark A, and I'll tell it to go to that bookmark. And you can see, in fact, that it does go from the beginning of the word current through the complete end of the paragraph. When you are writing generalized code to find bookmarks or replace the contents of a bookmark with some other contents or what have you, you have to remember that in order to write your code to be as robust as possible, you have to take into consideration that bookmarks can be siblings of runs and bookmarks can be siblings of block level content such as a paragraph. There's a fairly easy way to deal with bookmarks if you need to insert a bookmark at a very specific place or replace the contents of a bookmark with other contents. The technique consists of one of transforming the word processing ML into an invalid form temporarily that is much easier to deal with. I call this approach flattening the paragraphs. You can then deal with the bookmarks in a very regular fashion. After doing whatever you need to do with those bookmarks, such as extracting the text of a bookmark or replacing the text or the contents of a bookmark, you can then unflatten the content, transforming it back into valid word processing ML. At the following link, you can find a screencast that discusses this technique in detail. The blog post associated with that screencast contains code that shows how to manipulate bookmarks in this fashion. Now let's look at range permissions. Range permissions are a powerful feature of word processing ML that I think that people haven't taken advantage of enough. But they're not hard, and particularly when you're doing certain types of automatic document generation, setting up range permissions can be a very powerful approach. I'll create a little document. I'll insert some text. I'll insert name, colon, and I'll put a couple of tabs, and I'll put some underlines, and I'll put address, and I'll put some underlines there. Now I'll go to the Developer tab. By the way, I'm sure you know, but if you don't know, if you go to File, Options, Customize Ribbon, then you have to check this checkbox right here to turn on the Developer tab. I'll go to the Developer tab. I'll tell that I want to restrict editing. I will check this checkbox, which is allow only this type of editing in the document, and I'm going to allow no changes. I'll make the document read-only. I'll now go and select the field for the name, and I'll say that everybody can modify that. And what you can see is that Word puts these square brackets around that region, and it gives a little faint background color to that region. I'll do the same thing for this address. I'll indicate that everyone can modify that address. And I'll tell Word that yes, I want to start enforcing protection. I'll not put a password on this. It's not really relevant to this conversation. I'll click OK. And now we can see that I can't type anything there, but I can come over here and I can indicate that my name is Eric White and my address is 123 Main Street. I'm going to undo those two changes so we can see what the markup looks like without those changes. I'm going to save the document, close it, drag the document onto Visual Studio, and open up the main document part. And here we can see the permission start element and the permission end element. This is the permission start and end for the name. And down here I can see the permission start and permission end elements for the address. You can take a lot of approaches. You could have just a single space between these. You have a fair amount of latitude about how you structure this document. This would be really useful in a scenario where, say that you need to send a bunch of forms out to members of your club, and each member needs to fill out this form and return it to you. You can create this form. You can even have each form be customized for each person, and there are specific regions where each person has to enter the information. Then they send their documents back to you, and you can go into these documents and extract that content for these fields. And for instance, you might want to populate a database with that content. Just to finish talking about permissions, let's look at the settings part. And in the settings part, we can see that there is this document protection element. And in that protection element, the edit attribute is set to read only and enforcement is set to true. If you were to protect the document with a password, you would find that password in a hashed form in the settings.xml part. We'll look at spelling and grammar really quickly. I typed "this is a test," but I misspelled A. I'll save it, close it, and open the document, and look in the main document part. And here we can see the cross-structure annotations for the issue with spelling start and spelling end. One of the things that's interesting is you can come in here and programmatically delete those spelling start and spelling end elements, save it, and open up the document, and you will no longer see the little squiggly red line. Sometimes in certain scenarios, when you generate a document or you're modifying a document, it's helpful to go in and clean out those spelling and grammar elements. The last topic that we're going to talk about in this screencast is revision tracking. My advice for dealing with revision tracking consists of the following. You don't really want to deal with those revision tracking elements and attributes. So if you can, one approach is, if you, for instance, need to process OpenXML word processing documents and you have the capability to restrict that the documents that you're going to process should not have revision tracking in them, then you can quite easily check to see whether a document has revision tracking in it. If the document does have revision tracking in it, then you can decline to process it as appropriate or take appropriate action. Let the user know about that. If it is required that you process documents and the documents might have revision tracking in them and might not have revision tracking in them, then what I recommend that you do is you accept all tracked revisions. Some time ago, I wrote some code that is part of Power Tools for OpenXML, and it programmatically accepts tracked revisions and results in a document that has no revision tracking markup. If you need to process a document, for instance, to generate HTML from that document or what have you, then first thing to do is to accept all tracked revisions and then proceed to process the document as usual. This MSDN article describes in exacting detail how all the elements and attributes that are associated with revision tracking work. You can find this MSDN article at this link. On my MSDN blog, I detail a way that you can accept tracked revisions and do it in memory and then process the document as appropriate. You can find this blog post here. So I'm not going to go through all the details of how revision tracking works. Instead, I'm just going to recommend that you don't mainly deal with all of those elements and attributes. Either don't process documents that contain those elements and attributes, or programmatically accept tracked revisions and then process the document. And then that enables you to completely ignore all of those elements and attributes in your processing code. That's all I'm going to cover in this screencast. In the next screencast, I'm going to discuss tables. In the meantime, come back often to openxmldeveloper.org and either participate in the forums or see the new content that we're constantly producing. You can follow me on Twitter at EricWhiteDev. You can follow OpenXML on Twitter at OpenXMLDev. And you can find my personal blog at ericwhite.com.